Hey guys, Darren at ProtoPie here, and this evening, it is the evening, I'm going to be showing you how to build a voice assistant using the new voice features in ProtoPie 5.1. I built a prototype the other day, which I shared, you may have seen it, and I promised that I was going to show you guys how I built it. So this is this video. We're going to be going through and building that demo. So for folks that haven't seen it, I'm just going to run it now so you can see what we're going to be building. So here we go.
Evening, Darren.
Show me the weather. Okay then, so the first thing we're going to build is the Siri animation, so the little floating orb that's sitting at the bottom of the screen. And I've got a file already created with my graphics in, so I'm just going to run through what I've got graphically set up. So if we have a look over in the layers panel here, I've got a mask, which is just a rectangle that's just masking the background image. So if I just demask this, you'll see it's just masking the image in the background, so nothing particularly special there. The background image is just an image I downloaded off of Unsplash, so you can go and choose whatever background image you like. The home icons, these are just graphics that I've got from Sketch. So in Sketch, you get, as part of the iOS library, you get some templates, and I've just stolen the template for the home screen here, and I've just imported it into ProtoPie. Next up, I've got a scrim. So this is just a rectangle. If I just bring the opacity up, this is just a rectangle that's got 70% fill of black, and we're going to use this to darken the screen when we bring up the weather widget. Let's just turn the opacity of that back down. Next up is the group of the Siri orb. So if I just bring the opacity up for that. So this is what we're going to be creating first in this first section. So I'm going to turn that back down. And next up, we've got the weather widget itself. So this is something that I've just created completely inside of ProtoPie. And I've just used, apart from this moon graphic, which I created in Figma, the rest of it is created completely within ProtoPie, just using text layers here and some styling. And then I've also got inside of here, we've got an iOS background blur, which is just a shape layer. So it's a native ProtoPie shape layer, which allows you to apply that background blur that you get inside of iOS, and this runs natively on an iOS device. Okay, so basic setup. And then finally, I've got this invisible button. This is just a big rectangle that's sitting at the bottom of the screen, which now allows me to initiate Siri in the first place. Unfortunately, you can't control your prototype using any of the external buttons on your iPhone. You can do that on an Android phone. You've got control over the volume controls, but you can't do that on an iPhone. So I've just got this fake button at the bottom of the screen, which I'm going to use to instigate Siri. Okay, so let's get to our first job, which is to create the animation for the Siri orb. So, and I'm just going to turn the opacity of my weather widget down. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a trigger, and the trigger we're going to add is sound. So as we're talking, the orb is going to react to the sound that we're making. Okay, so if I just open up the voice group, you can see that I've effectively made the Siri orb out of a whole load of shape layers, so these ovals that I've created natively inside of ProtoPie. And if I just bring up the opacity for a sec, we can see that I've got, and if you have a look over here at the preview, why I just cycle through these, so I've got a whole range of different colors applied. I've got some shadows which I'm using as highlights, so I'm applying some brighter colours to those shadows to make them, to get these kind of glows. So I'm creating all these different glows, and this was really just an experimental process. I just kept adding circles, kept changing colours, moving things around, and just experimenting really with something. And as I kept animating it, just kind of kept tweaking it until I got something I was happy with. So I'm going to add some responses, and we're going to attach some responses to most of these, if not all of these circles here. And we're going to be using a mix of 3D rotate, opacity, scale, and 2D rotate. So the first thing we're going to add is a 3D rotate. And we're going to add this to the oval blue circle, so oval blue. And you can see down here we've got a range that we need to fill in. So on the left hand side we've got the range of decibels. So we're starting at 40, which is our quietest sound, and going up to 100, which is our loudest sound. And we're going to map this to a value here. So because we're using 3D rotate, we're going to map it to from 0 to 360 degrees, so a complete rotation. So we're just going to add 360 in here, and we're just going to reduce the decibels down to 80. We want to have this react a little bit more, so the shorter the range, then the more reactive it is. And you can see down at the bottom here we've got a choice of orientations that we could use. For this one we're going to keep to this rotating left orientation, and we're going to leave everything else as is. It's worth pointing out that I also played around with the origin points. So sometimes they're in the center, sometimes they're over on the left. So yeah, just moving those around again, just playing around with different ideas of how the animation could work. Okay, so next up we're going to add another 3D rotate, and this is going to be for the oval red. Oval red. And we're going to set this to 80 again, and we're also going to set this to 360. This time we're going to change the rotation to rotate from the bottom to the top. Next up we're going to add a 2D rotate, and we're going to add this to our oval one. And again we're going to set this to 80, and we're also going to set this to 360. And we're going to leave the default of clockwise rotation on this one. Okay, so we're going to add another 2D rotate, and this time it's going to be to the ring 1. So this ring 1 is just it has no fill, it's just got a border, and I've given that a 20% fill, so that's just one of these kind of rings you can see here. Okay, and we're going to leave the range as is, and we're just going to set this to 360. And again we're going to leave the rotation on clockwise. Next up we're going to add another 2D rotate, and we're going to set this to 360. You can see a pattern forming here, and we're going to reverse the rotation for this one just to get a bit of variation in there. Okay, so next up we're going to add an opacity, and we're going to add this to white 1. So this is just one of my glowing circles. So again, it's got a fill of 100, and it's got a shadow which I'm actually, because I'm applying white to it, it's actually giving it a glow. Okay, and we're going to set the range from 40 to 60, and we're going to set the opacity from 0 to 100. So when the sound gets registered, it's going to oscillate between 0 and 100 opacity. So it's going to give a kind of flickering effect. And that's really good for a visual look of reacting to sound. Pulsing, oscillating, all those things are good. Okay, so we're going to add another opacity. And this time we're going to apply it to white 2. White 2. And we're going to set this to a range of 40 to 60 and 0 to 100. Okay, and we're going to set out another opacity, and this is going to be to white 3. White 3, and again, same range, 40, 60, 0, 100. Next up, we're going to add a rotate, so a 2D rotate this time, and we're going to apply this to oval green. And you can see here that the origin point is on the left hand side. So for the animations where we're using 2D rotation, we're setting the origin not in the center. Obviously there'll be absolutely no point of setting the origin in the center for a 2D rotate because it's a circle and you wouldn't see it moving. So we're applying this to an origin of the left. So basically the circle is going to orbit around that origin point. And we're going to set the rotation to 360 degrees. So again, from a range of 40 to 100 on the decibel, applied to 0 and 360, and we're going to have that as a clockwise rotation. Next up, we're going to add another 2D rotate, and this time we're going to add it to oval purple. And we're going to also set this to 360, but we're going to change the direction to counterclockwise. Right, nearly there. So we're going to add our scales now. So we're going to add a scale to our oval purple circle. And we're going to leave the range again as it is. We're going to change the width and the height to 100 and 120. And we're going to do that, make that the same on the height as well. And we're going to add one last scale. This time we're going to apply it to oval red. And we're going to scale by size. And again, we're going to leave the range at 40, 100, and we're going to change the size to starting at 60, both for the width and the height. Moving to 80 for both the width and the height. Okay, so let's run our prototype to see what our Siri animation looks like. So I'm going to start talking into the phone, and you can see that we've got the Siri animation reacting to my voice, and you can see that all the different circles are moving in different directions, and it's really cool. I think, you get this real sense that it's reacting to my voice. So that's all being controlled by the sound trigger. So there you go, part 1 completed. Okay, so in this next part we're going to create the text-to-speech functionality. So this is the part where the voice assistant is going to greet me, and we're going to hook that up to our invisible tap trigger at the bottom of the screen. So the first thing we want to do is, let's just close up this voice, and we want to select our button. This is just a regular rectangle that I've created in ProtoPie, and all I've done is made sure the fill is 0. Doesn't really matter what the color is, as long as you've got the opacity at 100 so that it can accept the tap trigger. And so we're going to make sure that's selected. We're going to add a tap trigger, and we're going to add an opacity, and we're going to choose the voice group, and we just need to make sure we need to turn our voice group opacity down to 0, and we want to use this opacity trigger to bring our voice visual its opacity up to 100, and we're going to leave the duration at 0.2. Next up, we're going to add a scale, and we're going to scale the voice by a factor, and we're going to scale it to 100. We're going to be setting the scale to a smaller size in a minute, and we're going to use a spring easing curve, I think, so we want to give it a little bit of bounce, and we're going to leave the spring at all the default presets. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so next up we're going to add our text to speech. So this is one of 2 of the new features which has been added as part of ProtoPie 5.1. So we're going to add a text to speech, and we're going to leave it at start. So we want the text to speech to start as soon as we press our tap trigger, and we're going to add our text in here. So you just type whatever text you want the voice assistant to speak in this box. So we're just going to put evening Darren, because that's my name and it's the evening, and we're going to leave it on English United States. You've got a whole range of accents and languages that you can choose from this list. We're just going to leave it to English United States, and we will leave the voice. You can choose female or male, so we'll leave it at female, and we're going to leave all the other settings at their defaults. Okay, next up we're going to add a speech recognition, and we're going to leave it on start. So we want our speech recognition to start, and we want to delay it, and we're going to delay it by 1 second because we've got the text to speech which is actually going to be speaking, and if we start the speech recognition straight away, it's going to pick up the text to speech as well. So and if we'll probably be okay, but if it thinks it's saying one of the keywords that we're going to add, then it's going to trigger the widget. So we're going to just delay it by 1 second so we can get our text to speech out of the way before we start listening for speech. Okay, so next up we're going to build our speech recognition so that we can instigate the showing of the weather widget. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a trigger, and we're going to add the recognize speech sensor. Okay, so we're going to choose while speaking. So there are 2 trigger points that we have available to us, and I've just found that setting while speaking just makes the recognition, the action you attach to it a little bit faster, a little bit more responsive. But you can by all means try out after speaking as well. So we're going to actually use a command, so you can either select or deselect commands here just by clicking this checkbox. So we're going to select commands, and then basically what we need to add is a phrase or a range of phrases that we want the speech recognition to recognize. We're going to type our phrases in this box, and if you want to add multiple phrases, then you can just add each phrase on a separate line. Okay, so the phrase we're going to add is weather. So we're just going to type that in this box here. And I found that just adding keywords gives you a much greater chance of the recognition working more accurately. So don't feel like you have to add full sentences, because if you add a full sentence, then the speech recognition has to recognize the whole sentence, and if you get any part of that sentence wrong, or if the speech recognition doesn't quite understand any part of that sentence, then it's not going to match it. So stick to single words if you can, and that should work really well for you. So we're just going to add the word weather. We can say whatever we want, as long as we include the word weather. That's going to trigger our weather widget. Okay, so now we've set up our recognize speech trigger, we now want to add the responses inside of this trigger to show our weather widget. So the first response we're going to add is opacity, and we're going to choose the weather widget group. So we're just going to search for that, and we're going to set the opacity to 100, and we're going to leave the easing curves as they are, and we're also going to leave the duration as it is. So just basically leave it at the defaults. Next, we're going to add a move response, and we're going to move it to a Y position of 120. So it's just going to have a little animation of it fading in from 0 and moving slightly up to the top of the screen. You can see here that the starting position is about a third of the way down, so it just gives a nice animation to when it shows it on screen. We're going to just make the duration a little bit longer at 0.3, but we're going to leave the easing curve as it is. That's looking good for us. Okay, next up we want to add an opacity, and we want to add an opacity to the scrim. So the scrim is let me just find it here. The scrim is a rectangle which is just going to darken the back of the screen, so this will just give emphasis to the widget as it shows up, and it's going to darken away the home screen. And we're just going to increase the opacity to 100 here, and we're going to leave all the rest at the defaults. Finally, we're going to add a scale response, and this is going to be applied to the Siri orb. We want the Siri orb to reduce in size and effectively be a little bit de-emphasized, because we're now giving focus to the weather widget. So we're going to scale it by a factor, and we're going to set the factor to 50% for both the X and the Y. If you have the little lock icon locked, then it will make sure that the aspect ratio is kept. And again, we're going to leave the easing as is, and we're going to leave the duration as is. So next what I want to do is I want to be able to tap anywhere on the screen to get out of the whole Siri experience, and this is true of how it works on iPhone. So to do that, I'm going to add a tap trigger, and I'm going to apply that tap trigger to the screen, because the screen effectively at this point is going to be covering the whole of the screen. And I'm just going to change the opacity of the three items that we're using. So that's the Siri orb, the scrim itself, and the weather widget. So we're just going to add opacities for those. And we're just going to reduce them all down to 0. Set the voice to 0, and then finally one more opacity, and we're going to target the weather widget, and we're going to set that to 0. Okay, so one final job we need to do, and that is to set the starting state of our Siri orb. So if you remember, previously we set a scale to scale the orb up to 100, so we need to now set the default state to 50 so we can make that animation happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a start trigger, and this is a way I typically set default states. I set a lot of what I call runtime states in this way, and this is mainly because some things like scale, it's much easier to set the scale at runtime than it is to set it in the authoring environment. And also sometimes in the authoring environment, when you've got things like opacity, for example, and you want your starting state to be 0, having the need to turn the opacity down to 0 while you're working on the file can obviously be quite problematic. So what you can do, you can use this technique to set your default states at 0 at runtime. That means you can work on them in the authoring environment without having to kind of turn them, move them up and down and things like that. So we've got our start trigger here. We're going to add a rotate. And we're going to select the scrim, and we're going to set the So we're going to add a rotate, and we're going to select the voice group, and we're going to rotate it by 1, and we're going to leave the direction at clockwise. We're just going to reduce the duration to 0.1, and we're going to check the repeat box. So basically what we want to do here is I still want to have some life in the orb when it's not in use. So it's already going to be reacting to just the ambient noise in the room. That's going to make it oscillate a little bit. This is just going to give it a little bit more life. We're just going to rotate it really slowly so we've got some movement going on. So it's just a bit of an aesthetic to make it look alive and not have it looking too stagnant. So if we check the repeat, and we're going to change the interval to 0.1, and we're going to check the infinite repeat box to make it continuous. Finally, we're going to add a scale response, and we're going to scale our voice by a factor, and we're going to scale it to 50. So this will set our default size at 50%, so that when we engage with the recognized speech, and I think it's here where we scale it. No, actually it's not. It's here, isn't it? So here we're scaling it up to 100%. So this scale is setting its default state to 50, so that we can do that scale up to 100. And we're going to change the duration to 0 because we want the default state to happen immediately. We don't want the user to see that. So that's why we want to that's why we want it to happen instantly. Okay, so that's the final response. We've now completed our voice UI, and we can run it again. It's going to work exactly the same way as it did at the beginning of the video, but this is our first look at how we might use the voice recognition inside of ProtoPie to create a voice UI. So let's run the prototype now to make sure we've got everything correct.
Evening, Darren.
Show me the weather. Okay, so that concludes our first look at the new speech recognition features that have come into ProtoPie as of ProtoPie 5.1. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please give it a like, and if you want to see more videos from me, then be sure to remember to hit subscribe. If you would like to see more videos on the voice recognition features, then put a comment in the video below. I'm really interested to see how much interest there is for this feature, and obviously quite happy to do some more complex prototypes to really trying to stretch this feature to do different things. So if you've got any ideas for anything you want to see me do, then please let me know. Okay, so that's it from me, and I will see you next time.